if you give rivers more space to flood the lands, to bring sediment, sand, clay, they not only bring sediment, they also bring life.
Welcome to another episode of Rewilding the World. I'm Ben Goldsmith, and I'm here with Wouter Helmer, one of the true pioneers of rewilding in Europe. Because as well as founding Rewilding Europe, which I think is probably the most important rewilding charity now on the continent, Wouter has been leading efforts to create wild streaks and patches of nature across his native country, the Netherlands, and beyond now in Europe. And I went to see for myself. I was there just a few weeks ago. I had a lovely weekend in Amsterdam with my wife, away from the children. And then I met up with Wouter and some others, and Frans Scheppers from Rewilding Europe, and some Dutch philanthropists, and we went to see some extraordinarily wild places just across the water from England in what is Europe's most intensively managed, densely populated, most developed country. And there I felt like I was at times like I was in the Serengeti. Wild horses and bison and aurochs, or taurus as they call them. And Wouter really can claim a lot of credit for what's happened in the Netherlands and for that country becoming one of the leaders in rewilding. And that's what I want to talk to you about today, Wouter. I'm so grateful to you for joining me. And I just want to start immediately talking about natural flood management, because, of course, the Netherlands is the delta lands. It's the delta of the Rhine. And in the Netherlands, if you get flood defense wrong, millions of people are displaced or worse. And this seems to have been the main catalyst for creating wilderness in the Netherlands in the way that you have. So I'd love to just start there. Wouter, thank you for joining me and tell me.
Thank you for inviting me here. Yeah, I think that's indeed was an important reason to get rewilding off the ground in the Netherlands. And actually, it all started in 1986 with a complete new vision on the Dutch Delta, created by 6 people, writers of Plan Stork, as we call it in English, Plan Ooievaar in Dutch. And actually, for the first time, I think in history, they suggested to make nature part of the solution of a big socioeconomic issue. And you can also say for the first time in 800 years, they suggested to protect our country against floods, not with raising dikes, but by lowering the floodplains. And lowering the floodplains in combination actually with clay extraction, clay mining. And that was such an inspiring idea. And I just finished my study that I thought, okay, this is what I will dedicate the rest of my life to this idea of putting nature actually in the center of our modern society as a solution, and not as a weak thing that with high costs should be protected against society.
So what had Dutch flood defense really been about for the previous 800 years?
It was always actually the same reaction. If a flood happens, okay, we make the dikes higher. And by doing that, actually increasing the risk behind the dikes if something goes wrong. So a more sustainable solution is actually to give rivers more room. And that's what, not immediately, but what in the end became a national policy.
Yeah, those dikes are really something. I'd never seen them before. I'd never been into the Dutch countryside before. And these dikes seem to stretch for miles and miles in both directions on either side of the river. And they're enormous mounds. They look like Iron Age earthworks that we would see here in England. And you can imagine that between those dikes, they're able to contain a lot of water. And I was there not long after the summer, so the river was just a simple ribbon of water running down the middle of the floodplain between the dikes. But I guess because it's the Rhine, the volumes of water can be truly immense. So were there some catastrophic floods where the water breached the dikes and flooded on either side in any parts of the Netherlands, which catalyzed this conversation around making more space for rivers?
Yeah, so those catastrophic things happened in history, the last one in 1926. But then by new models, we saw that it could happen again in the late 80s. And then this new vision was produced. And then together with some friends, we were so excited about this vision that we said we should bring it into practice. We have to test this idea of lowering floodplains. And that's how we started in the late 80s. With ARC Rewilding the Netherlands, actually, which is how it's called now. And we started our first pilot projects where we wanted to show to the public, okay, if we not raise the dikes but lower the floodplains, this could be your future landscape, accessible for everybody, very natural, and at the same time solving both issues on flood protection and clay mining and so on. But then we also learned that it's not enough to have good vision and pilot projects. There's also, you need a sense of urgency to do something. Or if you want, you need a disaster again to show people, okay, this is really urgent to act. And that happens actually in 1993, 1995, when the water levels came so high that we had to evacuate 250,000 people in the area. We had hundreds of millions of damage in the area. So at that time, there was an urgent need to do something. And actually at that time, our solution, which we have developed in a few years with WWF, by the way, which was called Living Rivers, there was broad support for that vision. And there was now that urgency. So in 1995, actually, Living Rivers became more or less the new national policy on river and flood management. Yeah, so a nearly disaster helped us to get us there. And it's good to know that 4 years ago, we had an even higher water along one of the other big river in the Netherlands, the Meuse, and higher than in 1993 when we had hundreds of millions of damage. And 4 years ago, we had no damage at all because of the rewilding approach. So it really works.
What I found so fascinating was that really you're killing three birds with one stone, because with the idea you had, which was to pull back the earth and allow the aggregates companies to extract clay, a renewable resource, because the Rhine is laying about an inch of clay, you told me, every year in deposits along the rivers and in floodplains. So harvesting this renewable resource for building, for creating bricks and so on, as well as any sand and other aggregates that might be needed. At the same time, you're then lowering the earth within the dikes, dropping the level of the land so that the capacity for holding water is much greater. So you're dealing with natural flood management. And then the land, once the clay has been extracted, is given over to nature. And you have these incredible wild corridors that I saw when I was there, which stretch for miles and miles in both directions. It's kind of the neatest solution I've ever seen, because just nature on its own doesn't seem to be a powerful enough justification for large-scale rewilding. But when you throw in a country's desperate need for building materials and even more desperate need for protection from these floods, and suddenly you've got this like rewilding movement like nothing any country in Europe had ever seen. And I'd never seen anything like it. I stood there in Nijmegen with you with a coffee in my hand at the top of the dike, and I look down and I see rivers, multi-braided channels moving down the landscape all the way to the German border one way and all the way in the other direction. And there are wild horses and there are full guild of herbivores, deer and so on. But you also have now the carnivores moving up these corridors as well, the wolves and so on. So it's an incredibly neat solution. But how did you come to get the government and the aggregates companies and the farmers and the local communities all to agree on this solution? Because the status quo beforehand was something totally different. You had farming happening within these dikes, and farmers don't like giving up their land. So how did all these threads get drawn together so that the solution was able to happen?
And quite intensive farming, I can tell you. So I think there are not so many places in Europe where the farming is so intense as in the Netherlands, and where the land prices are that high. But you have to also you have to understand that in the 80s, we had 3 summer floods in a row, spoiling the whole harvest of the floodplains. So also the farmers in the river area understood that the floodplains are less valuable to them than the land on the other side of the dike. And by the way, by concentrating the clay mining in the floodplains, actually the clay mining companies pay for the transition of farmland to nature. So farmers get a good price for their land because the mining companies could pay that money to them. So understanding that the value of the floodplains was decreasing because of more floods, getting a good price for the land on the floodplains, the farmers already in the early 90s decided to cooperate in this rewilding program for the floodplains. And for the clay industry, it was important that they had more and more problems to get permits for mining, because in the past mining was really a terrible thing. So they just dig holes, fill it up with garbage, covered it again and sold it again to farmers. That approach was not longer accepted in the Netherlands. So there was more and more public protest against mining. And actually we made a deal with the mining companies that if they do it in another way, as we call it, relief following mining, they could create very natural landscapes. And we would help them to get permits if they do it like this. So it was also for the benefit of the clay mining industry. And actually, by having And already in 1993, we signed a covenant between WWF and the brick factories to do it like this. So everything was ready actually to jump for the last thing, that was the flood management. And as I said, when those almost disaster happened in 1995, we were ready to solve it in this way. So both water managers, mining companies and farmers were behind the plan when the disaster happened.
So the mining companies then bought out the farmland between the dikes along long stretches of the floodplain. They then came in with their machines, they peeled back the earth, they took out the clay. Then what happened? Who owned the land subsequently? Once the mining companies were finished with that land, what was the process for creating wild corridors?
And it happened, by the way, in a pace of about 100 hectares per year. So that's the amount of clay we need for our national brick industry. So in that pace, we moved farmland into rewilding areas, natural areas. That was first done pilot by ARC Rewilding the Netherlands with support of WWF actually. And but we always we did the planning. By the way, we also had a consultancy making plans for landowners, for mining companies, for local governments. Then we started pilot projects with ARC. We released keystone species, as we call them, like indeed horses, tauros, beaver. And then if everything is there and working, because also every area has its own specific approach. We have to test in reality, having people looking over our shoulders if things go well, both ecologically, economically, socially. And if it all works well, we hand it over to traditional conservation organizations like the State Forestry Department or Natuurmonumenten, which is the biggest private nature organization in the Netherlands. And by doing so, actually, we were accepted by the conservation organization as well. Because in the first period, they were quite critical about what we were doing, because they thought we were dealing with enemies like water managers and mining companies. But when we handed over all these areas to them, I can tell you in quite a good condition and with quite spectacular species there, then also we won the trust of the conservation organizations. And then it's just step by step moving from pilot projects of only a few hectares to pilot floodplains of a few hundred hectares to now in the end several tens of thousands of hectares of rewilded areas along the rivers. Just for example, we released the first beavers in the top of the delta in 1994, 54 animals. And I think we have now 5,000, 6,000 all over the Netherlands. We have those herds of feral horses, cattle reproducing 20-25% per year. So in the meantime, also thousands of animals free roaming more or less in these floodplains. And that all attracts so many people to these areas that actually we are building a complete new economy in these river landscapes. So just to give you an example, here in the Gelderpoort, the top of the delta, when I was a young boy doing bird watching, bird monitoring in that area, probably 40, 50,000 people came there every year. It's now over 1.5 million, contributing to the local economy with about 25 million extra in nature tourism, creating 300-400 jobs, new jobs in the area. So it really contributed to a complete new economy. And I think that's what made it so popular in the Netherlands to do it like this.
So it's four birds with one stone in terms of the solution multiplier effect. And I saw it with my own eyes. I saw people commuting to work in suits on their bicycles or mobility vehicles along these pathways that run alongside the river and crisscrossing the river. And I can see why they're drawn to these landscapes. I just couldn't believe I was in the Netherlands. I really urge anyone listening to this podcast, go to the Netherlands and see the living rivers for yourself, because these wide floodplains with multi-braided river channels running through them and large herbivores, it's just something to be seen, to be believed. And how did you feel about it, Wouter? When you first started scaling up these projects, how did you feel about the resurgence of nature? Describe a little bit for me the amazing uplift of nature, the species moving in.
Yeah, the exciting thing is that actually when you give space to nature, you are just amazed about how resilient it is and how fast recolonization of land goes with, if you give rivers more space to flood the lands, to bring sediment, sand, clay. They not only bring sediment, they also bring life. Hundreds of plant species are coming with the water from France, from Switzerland, from Germany to the Netherlands, to the Delta, and spread there. I've seen big mushrooms with the flood coming downstream. And when I cut through the mushroom, I saw thousands of insects within these small arcs coming from upstream and colonizing the floodplains. Thousands of species returned after we moved intensive farmland towards a natural floodplain. And on top of this, thousands of species of plant coming back, many thousands of species of insects. Of course, you also get the species higher up in the food chain. And for example, last year we had our first breeding pair of white-tailed eagle here nearby. Osprey is coming back. Otter is coming back. So it's just amazing. And of course, some things didn't happen that we expected. For example, this plant stork is called after the black stork. We expected to have that species back breeding in the Netherlands, but that still didn't happen. But instead of the black stork, we had dozens of other spectacular species coming back. So it's important thing of rewilding is also that you let it go. You are not putting a concrete goal on nature, but that you just wait and see how nature is reorganizing itself, and that's amazing. And every time, yeah.
The great conservationist John Lawton did a report maybe 15 years ago. It described a roadmap for restoring nature in Britain. And it can be summed up really as follows: bigger, better, and more joined up. And that's what I saw in the Netherlands. I saw a country that really has ambition to do this. And the joined up bit seems to be the most comprehensive part because of these extraordinary wild river corridors that now crisscross the country and connect up the patches of nature, which is why the beavers and the wolves have managed to recolonize a country so densely populated as the Netherlands. But you also have the bigger and better part as well. I went to Oostvaardersplassen, which I think is something around 20,000 acres. And I honestly felt like I was in the Serengeti. And when I saw these animals galloping through shallow pools of water and sandy islands and huge murmurations of starlings and flocks of birds everywhere. And I wonder, why are the Dutch so much calmer around charismatic wildlife than other people, than, say, the Brits? The tolerance, for example, for bison. They're just a two-strand electric fence. On one side, you have the bison, wild living European bison. On the other side, you have commuters going to work on their bicycles. And then nobody's afraid. People give the animals their distance, a little bit of respect, and they observe them, they stop and take pictures, and then they carry on. And of course, you have wolves now in the Netherlands. I understand there's more wolves in the Netherlands, which is the world's second largest food exporter, a very serious farming nation. I think it's second after the US or Brazil, I forget. And you have more wolves in the Netherlands than you do in Norway, which is one of Europe's least densely populated countries with enormous wild spaces, and apparently they can't live alongside wolves because it's too difficult and coexistence is too hard. So why are the Dutch so relaxed around wildlife, which is so key to this process of restoring self-willed nature in the way that you have?
Yeah. Of course, you don't have to forget, we are now 35 years down the line. So it didn't start like, as you now mentioned, we also had in the first years, we have to bridge some gaps between what we want to achieve and how people were perceiving in nature. But I think one thing that helped is that nature was really at its lowest point in the 80s in the Netherlands. So we had almost nothing left. So there was really a need for nature in this country, especially because I think also at the same time you see the demography of the country was changing fast. So more and more people living in cities. And so 100 years ago, we were a farming nation. 70% of the people were direct or indirect linked to farming. Now most people are citizens having a job 9 to 5. And so the need to go out in nature in the weekends or in the free time you have is much bigger than in the past when you were just living on your farm. So I think that's also a thing. But which is a trend that's happening in all over Europe. Young children students, they move to the cities, to the coastal areas, and not taking over the job of their parents, having some goats or cows in the mountains or somewhere in the marshes. So it's that demographic trend, I think, also helped to, strange enough, to reconnect people with nature, because just want to go out in nature in their free time. I don't think so. Those are some aspects I think that helped. And then, of course, very important that we immediately after having a bold vision on flood management or clay mining, or now at this moment on healthcare, by testing it in the field and inviting everybody to come and look to these pilot areas, that helped very much the public acceptance of what we were doing. People felt involved in what we were doing, and that went from very small things to big. So local people we invited to remove the fences with us. So just having a great day, removing fences at the end of the day, having a good meal together, some live music, and then from that moment releasing the herd together, that really attracts people to what we were doing. But at the same time, politicians, we invited, of course, I always say if the project fails, it's our problem. If it's a success, we should make others, very important persons, the mothers and fathers of that success. So opening new areas with important people in the area, releasing herds with important people, that's all very much contributed to the acceptance. So some herds even we released 2 times the same herd because the minister and the governor couldn't make it on the same day. Quite boring for the herd probably, but it helped really to get from the local people to the main politicians in favor of what we were doing.
This episode of Rewilding the World is very kindly brought to you by Uni, that's UNI, the world's first nature-friendly line of luxury body care. We've all heard about the harm that sun cream does to coral reefs, but it's not just sun cream and it's not just coral reefs. Well, Uni makes plastic-free, nature-friendly essentials like shampoo, conditioner, hand wash, and even natural deodorant, all full of nourishing ingredients such as seaweed kelp, aloe vera, and olive oil. We've been loving our Uni products, but don't take it from me. Here's my wife, Jemima.
Yes, I really love them. They're such clean and nourishing products. The microalgae body oil is so good and really smells amazing.
You can find Uni products at Space NK or at weareuni.com. And what specifically have you got to say about the return of wolves to the Netherlands, Wouter? Because it's such a political hot potato now across the continent, but the Netherlands seems to be managing better than other places.
Yeah, I think, of course, in general, it's a very positive thing that not only in the Netherlands, by the way, but in all over Europe, large predators are coming back. Brown bears are doing well, wolves are doing well. But of course, interesting enough, now they are entering the most crowded part of Europe. And yeah, here again, we have to learn to live together with the wolves. And that's what's happening at the moment at a big time. So, of course, there are people who want to get rid of them. But it's a very small minority. So I think the biggest majority of the Netherlands, again, maybe because people are living in cities and don't have problems, again, with their sheep or their cows with wolves. They are just want to see a wolf and have the experience of seeing a wolf family. And that's what thousands of people with expensive cameras brings to the areas where wolves live at the moment. So again, the getting back to wolves in parts of the Netherlands attracts a lot of people, creates a new local economy. And but of course, we also the wolves have to learn to live with us. So here, I think we also have to make clear also to wolves not to come too close to people and frighten them if they do. And if we do that, and I think also animal lovers should be aware of this, that we can't keep all the wolves, even if they are, if they are making problems. We also should, from time to time, take out maybe a wolf just to save the majority of the wolves in this country. But learning to live together, I think, is a very important thing of rewilding. Just that's how we get people, how people accepted also the wild horses and the beaver, but not immediately. Just learning by doing and hoping to find a new balance. And I can tell you, a landscape with wolves is so much more exciting than without wolves. Also, just how the other animals react on it, how forest can regenerate because wolves keep numbers of deer in some places low, and so on. That's exciting thing but I think we will find a way to live with them in the Netherlands as well. No problem.
And how far, Wouter, do you think the Netherlands can go? Having gone this far with its Living Rivers program and some of these big areas like Oostvaardersplassen, and with a public that seems very willing to engage with nature in the way that Dutch people do, what's your vision for the country that you're from?
Yeah, I think we still have some things. So the river program will continue. Will happen. I think we will create a green network in the Netherlands. Also, by keeping water upstream in some places, also very important to lower the risk of floods downstream in some cities. We have already some examples there as well to have nature areas storing water at the source. Then we are at the moment busy with the coastal areas to make them more resilient using natural processes like the sand engine, like reflooding polders to get more sediment and let them growing with the sea. I think one of the biggest things in the coming decades will be the relation between nature and healthcare. We get stuck with our healthcare, and that's not only in the Netherlands, I think. And it's already proven in many ways that nature can solve some health issues much cheaper than medicines or hospitals. So creating green environments around villages will surely help a lot of people getting rid of their health problems and saving a lot of cost in healthcare. So maybe again here a disaster has to happen to get people feel the urgency of it. But I'm almost sure that within a few decades, health insurance companies will invest in nature just out of own interest, and I think that's something for the near future. And then, of course, there are also other things than like carbon storage that we are doing. Imagine you have seen those river areas, thousands of hectares of new forest. No single tree of that is planted. No protection of those trees. It's just carbon sequestration for free, almost. And so we are also solving some climate issues with rewilding in this country, which will continue, I'm sure.
So, Wouter, you've kind of created a template for the rest of Europe, and you were the co-founder of Rewilding Europe in 2011, which I think is, I said it earlier, it's the charity I love most, I think, in all of the rewilding charities. Like, I'm friends with France and the scale of your projects across the continent. So can you just tell me a little bit about that story, why you set up Rewilding Europe and what you hope to achieve in the coming years?
Yeah, so I think every one of the four founders has his own reasons to be involved, and indeed it became a very exciting story, and it's amazing what they are doing now at the moment. It's really becoming a worldwide movement. Just personally for me, it was the reason that I got involved was because, as I said, we are developing free roaming herds of horses and cattle in the Netherlands, and we were invited, or we got requests for herds from Germany and Belgium, France, UK as well, to offer them herds of these special animals to start rewilding areas there as well. Okay, that's neighboring countries. I understand this need, sometimes very similar to the Dutch need. But then we got requests from Latvia, Croatia, Bulgaria. I thought, shit, what's going on? And then I understood for the first time that this demographic revolution that's taking place in Europe. People are leaving rural areas. As I said, children are not taking over the jobs of their parents in remote areas. And with the people that abandon these areas, also their livestock abandons these areas. And these areas grow through with shrubland and forests and become also very vulnerable for large-scale forest fires. So there were more and more people in rural areas that say, okay, we can't get back those shepherds, but maybe we can get back herds of animals that do their job 24/7 without subsidies, keeping those landscapes open, making them less vulnerable for large fires, and making them also very attractive for tourists. So maybe we can, and I think that's one of the stories that makes Rewilding Europe so attractive, that we create new economies in remote areas where wild nature is the engine behind the new economy.
Yeah, it's the scale at which Rewilding Europe is working that really kind of blows me away. I'm interviewing Maria Kranajic from the Velebit Mountains in Croatia, who's one of Rewilding Europe's team members. And just the scale of that landscape in Croatia, that's kind of 1 million hectares plus. And it doesn't cost that much or require that much societal change to have landscapes that are working as they're meant to, with bears and wolves and large herbivores in big numbers. And I find it completely extraordinary. But what's particularly amazing is how all of that emerges from the pioneering work that's been done in the most unlikely of places for rewilding, which is the Netherlands.
Mm. Yeah, but again, so it's important to understand the principles behind rewilding, and then you can implement them actually everywhere in the world. Because if you change your mindset from nature is vulnerable, have to be protected against with high cost against society, but if you change that into the mode that you say, okay, no, nature can be a strong partner in solving socioeconomic issues like flood management, like drink water quality, like healthcare, like sustainable mining, like reducing wildfires, setting up a new rural economy. Of course, there are no blueprints, but with this mindset, you can look at every landscape in the world and see the opportunities that are there.
Even in the middle of cities, like Nijmegen, where we stood together and looked down at the river flowing through. Can we just talk a little bit about the most recent work that you're doing, Wouter, which is in Idaho, a place I've never visited, but I was lucky enough to speak to Manda, who's behind the Rewilding America Now project. And then I was amazed when we sat together in the Netherlands to find out that you're consulting all the way over there as well in the American West. And there really is immense scale for restoring vast grassland ecosystems, which have mostly been lost. Illinois, the prairie state, as it's known, has less than 0.1% of its original prairie remaining. But there are large-scale restoration projects happening in Montana and in Wyoming, and the bison numbers are returning. And often these projects are led by Native Americans who want to have the bison back in their own lands. What are you doing in Idaho, and what's the potential there?
I was just invited to advise them 3-4 years ago when I did an online presentation about rewilding Europe, and they say, "Okay, this is interesting. Maybe we can use some of your ideas here as well." And then I got more and more involved, and again I said, "Yeah, okay." They had a good theory about bringing back wild horses in the rural landscapes. I said, but again, here you should also have projects on the ground where people can see and look with you how it could look like. And we had first some smaller projects in North and South Dakota with local rangers, with local tribes. But then indeed this opportunity came up in Birch Creek, Idaho. And this is an amazing opportunity, Ben. If you coming from Europe, standing in a landscape and you can look 100 kilometers away and only seeing nature more or less. It's interesting of this is it's a valley where that in potential could connect the mountain chains of where also Yellowstone Park is situated to the Snake River Valley. And what's still not possible yet, but we hope to make it possible in this valley, is to recreate actually the migration route for bison, wild horses, and all the deer species and predators between the mountain area and the river. And then we're talking about an area of about 400,000 hectares. It will be an amazing experience to see those big migration routes, which were indeed before there, when the native people still were in charge. Of course, we also want to have them on board. So we are cooperating with local rangers, but also with the Shoshone tribe to create this immense valley opportunity. And again, not only getting wildlife back, but also I'm 100% sure that if we manage to do this, hundreds of thousands of people will visit this valley and create a complete new economy here, which also helps the people who are left there.
It sounds to me, Wouter, like we need to do a whole episode on Idaho. And so I will be in touch with you to talk about that. And perhaps even I might have a chance to visit you one day. I have to be in America in the middle of next year. And I'm wondering whether I can go to see the extraordinary American Prairie Project in northern Montana. My first ever podcast episode was with Alison Fox, the chief executive of American Prairie. And she keeps saying, I've got to come. And I definitely will. But I'll be in touch about that. But Wouter, it's such an honor and such a joy to have you on my podcast. And I'm so grateful to you for taking the time out, not just for this conversation, but to show me around in the Netherlands a few weeks ago. I was left filled with inspiration, and it was a beautiful sunny day, and we were in a landscape that was just thrumming with life. And it's all thanks to you and your colleagues. You're an inspiration to me. Thank you so much.
Well, it's great to be here, and maybe our next meeting will be in Idaho. Let's see. So yeah, and good luck with your podcast. It's really interesting to have this medium available for the rewilding movement, which is growing very fast at the moment.
I really was blown away seeing these wild areas in the Netherlands. Wouter is a true visionary, and I'm so privileged to have met him and to have got him onto the podcast. I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I enjoyed having that conversation with Wouter, and as much as I enjoyed visiting these wild areas with him a few weeks ago. And I hope you'll give us a like, give us a share on whatever platform you use to get your podcasts. Follow us on Instagram @BenGoldsmith. I've also got a Substack. My most recent article was about Pablo Escobar's escaped hippos in Colombia, which stirred up quite a bit of attention and controversy. Next time, we'll be travelling to the southeastern United States, to Georgia, to talk with Josh Marks, the founder of Georgians for the Okefenokee, one of the great wetlands of North America and the largest federally protected area east of the Mississippi. The Okefenokee has suffered an onslaught of threats, but Josh and his friends have fought them off one after the next.